So please, if you have anything to say, just interrupt directly.
Hi, Stephen.
Yes, that's right. And I was there.
We didn't discuss the way the schedule is supposed to work, like the rules. How do we decide which job gets executed first? How do we rearrange jobs in the queue? Move, jobs between the queues for arbitrary reasons.
Well, whenever I've talked with Paul about this, he said, don't do that. Let's just assume we have enough resources to start with and solve those problems when we actually have to, rather than assuming we're going to have problems.
No, I'm not assuming we have some kind of problems. Just like, what are the things we wish to implement as actually scheduling, parts of the scheduler?
Sorry, I missed that. What was?
So, do we have any plan to discuss the actual algorithm we want to implement inside the scheduler? How it's going to actually decide which job gets executed first? It's just like it keeps adding stuff to a queue, and that's it.
Right. So we have a concept already in the model of priority, and we know when the job was submitted to the queue. So I think between those two, you can go first based on priority. If we do use it, I don't think I think the main use case I see for priority is if you have a test that is very low priority. So it's more like a opportunistic, whenever you get to it kind of thing. And you would probably set the priority lower. Otherwise you would just assume that you want it to run early as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so after that, it would go based on
by the priority. And we would have a queue for every device that we physically have. And the queue is essentially something that feeds the dispatcher.
Right.
Right.
Would you not also want to say, if it's like coming up to monthly release, and there's a problem people will try to fix, perhaps have a little bit of higher priority?
Well, so,
Perhaps.
the way code import and Launchpad work is that sort of automatic stuff has a lower priority than anything that's being requested by a person, and that seems to work quite well. And it depends on how resource constrained you end up being as to whether any of this matters. Right? So if we're not terribly resource constrained, it doesn't
matter.
It doesn't matter. And if we are, then I don't know. I think it's more important we have something that exists than we spend hours worrying about this now. Is my opinion.
Right.
If it's there, I think people will end up using it.
No, we're not going to expose it to everyone. It's just like
Right. So initially, this is mainly targeted at automated things that are going to get kicked off based on new images building, new components and things like that, and eventually kind of expand a little bit to some of the working groups in Linaro, and I don't know. We'll see from there. We'll expand out as we can, but.
So I didn't really mention it. I've got a small bit of experience of automated building test systems from a previous job. And,
sure. Okay. So did you want to go start through the user stories, the existing user stories you have on your side?
Yes. Here are the user stories that we could identify by today. So I would like to go through them, and if you have any questions or comments, please interrupt directly. So I have done this like this. I have used two kind of users. One is Lava user, which can be Linaro engineer or manager or whatever, and also Lava admin, which can and that role can change different things in Lava. So first user story says that as a Lava user, I want to define and submit a test job manually using web UI and schedule it for one or more specific boards or board types. That's a basic user story actually. And a similar thing, just using CLI, is the next user story. And in this user story, you have a JSON file that is actually a definition for a test job.
So yeah, those two are pretty well known, I think.
Yes.
There's several other pieces of those that would have to get done first, but of the two, the CLI is clearly the higher priority task right now.
Yeah.
The web user interface is interesting and useful, especially as we get into people wanting to define tests without having to craft these job templates. But in the meantime, we have a lot of need for things to submit automated jobs, and the easier way to do that is through an API or through the command line interface.
Yeah. What I was thinking here that the biggest difference between these use cases is that end user in the second case using CLI would need to have a good knowledge about this JSON file and what is included there. But web UI is not a web UI user is not required to know that at all.
Of course.
So, is it a good solution for a CLI to have some kind of templating and not bothering about JSON files in the first place?
I was just so curious about this single thing here that says the user could schedule it for one or more specific boards or board types. So this implies something that expands some templates, and this is something we should discuss. And I think there is a template essentially.
Yes.
We just don't know where it came from, who gets to define it, and who gets to instantiate real jobs from this template. And
is the template something? Are you talking about like a server-side template or a local template?
it doesn't matter. It's just a template. It could. I've been thinking about this. I think that the scheduler, since it knows the queues for each device, kind of knows best how to expand the template for each board, for example. Because then what you'd have to do anyway is to go to the schedule, ask him what kind of templates can I expand into, and do it locally and send it, which is redundant.
I don't see the need for templates. The job is self-contained.
Yeah,
Right.
but since we have a story.
The only real use I see for templates is if you as a user have a typical set of tests that you want to run, and what you're changing is just one piece of it, like which image you're using, which kernel you're using, something like that. And so you could have a template locally that you're maybe just editing this one field in it and resubmitting it.
Okay, so
you want it again.
definitely not having templates simplifies stuff. It's a good thing. However,
Or
we
if
should-
you do have templates, it's something that you have locally, something
Yep.
that you know you want to run this pretty much every time. And
I mean, one of the things is, I can't remember how this works. Does the JSON file include which board it's going to run on?
Yep.
yes.
Because that's arguably not
Now,
very
one
good,
of the,
right?
one
That's
of
the
the
thing it
use
does.
cases for the scheduler is to, instead of taking a specific board, you have the opportunity to specify a board type
Yeah,
and possibly even tags.
right.
So that you could say, well, I really don't care which specific board I want to run this
And it
on,
needs to be a Panda.
but it needs to be this type of board, or it needs to have
Logic or
these
whatever.
capabilities.
I think the JSON file or the file you send into the command line should be only contain the test definitions, what you want to run, what test you want to run. But the command line should be able to return the board in the system dynamically, and the user can send the JSON file and specify the board type. So it's separate. Then you can reuse the same.
So like a
Your-
multi-step.
It will be like I think it will be like
it doesn't have
instantiating the
one.
actual template while you run the command on your computer, because then it will just take these arguments you also have and stick them into this JSON file and send it out. The reason why we have these things in the JSON file, because there are two consumers for this file. The scheduler is really interested, not in the actions, it's going to be interested in the top part when it says board class or board's actual board ID or some tags. And this is the only thing it's actually going to look at, to know which queue it's going to, maybe move it around in the future, whatever. And then the dispatcher just disregards this completely and just looks at the actions, because it already knows it's looking at just this board and gets the job. That's all it does. So we cannot avoid having these, and it's just a matter of when we actually put them there.
Yeah.
It doesn't change
the question,
anything.
The format should have both information, but when the user,
Yeah, I know. So it will essentially go back to having some kind of templates, just because it'll be annoying to have to edit it to change a single name here all over again. That's what I feel.
So,
That's the only use for templates I see now.
So I'll make one statement, and then I think I'm not going to go into it because otherwise I'll disrupt the meeting. But I think a job should be self-contained and it shouldn't have any reference to where it's going to run. and then a job belongs in a queue, and the queue is what says what class of board or capabilities or whatever else is going to run. And there's a lookup stage where you say, I want to deploy this job, which is build GCC across these type of capabilities, and that single job then ends up in queues. I don't think the core job, which is build GCC, should not have any information on it. It's saying where to build it.
So you're saying, in the terminology Zygmunt was just using, we should have the two parts should be in separate files or specified completely separate ways, essentially.
I think it's a little bit difference here. Essentially, yeah, the job is the actual actions to perform belong to the job, the rest does not. But when the act of sending the job to the scheduler, multiplies the job and puts it into discrete queues.
Yes, but the end user doesn't need to see that.
Yeah.
There is a place where they might want to, which is a job failed, which looks identical to other jobs they've submitted, but it's only failing on one board, they want to check, is that board giving me other results and the other one's fine? So coming from a background where we use platforms LSM inside up, queues are priority. There are tags which give you abilities for a machine, so
Right.
what operating system is running.
Right.
And that works very well. You can, if you want, specify a machine for it to run on, because occasionally something went wrong and it seems to be specific to one box.
Right.
And it's useful for Dave in the lab. You can say, this one appears to be dodgy. Can you
Hit it with a hammer.
Waggle the power supply? It's far easier for him to, instead of going around all the power.
One of the pandas is dodgy. Please find out where.
I am Christian Dave Bot.
Everything on them and see.
The good thing is he can now tell which ones are the pandas, because a couple of weeks ago he couldn't. So.
Because I put labels in front.
So in my little implementation, I have queues based on target class, so Cortex A9, Cortex A8, i686. I also have queues for the individual hosts. So I can say run this job on Ursa 4, which is
Right.
That's curious. So we have two queues that physically identify the same device, because this is a queue for Panda and this is a queue for A9.
yes.
How do you know? Where's the joining point for this queue? I feel that there's a really queue for a device and something that puts things based on tags to the queue. You can't have a queue based on class.
I disagree. So
But isn't one a queue for, I need to do this on an A9, don't particularly care which A9.
Yeah, but doesn't mean you have
I
a
want
queue
to do
for
this on
A9.
Would you just have one queue and then do this sort of push and pull scheduling, right?
yeah, so mine is pool-based, so normally everything goes into the Cortex A9 queue, and Ursa 4 says, give me my next job.
Right.
And the scheduler scans all queues that Ursa 4 belongs to and pulls out the highest
I think
priority
that-
job.
So
I think that's the only way you
how
can
do
make
you
sense of it.
define priorities between the same? Like, do you have two queues again, which attach to the same device in
I have
practice?
a very simple priority system, because all of these are files on a file system, and the newest one is the highest priority.
Okay.
So if I want to bump something up, I touch the file. And it does the job, it's okay.
I mean, yeah, I think so. I think for the way, for example, PPAs work well, the build system and Launchpad works is every so often it just scans through all the builders it has. If the builder is idle, it finds a job for it, moves on to the next one. And I think
We have a similar version because we know when something's idle.
right,
It's
but-
an event-based, and we know it's
Okay,
becoming
so
idle.
so again, but the event, so the way the scheduling works is there is an idle board, we find the job to run on it,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is different from when the job comes in.
Right.
We say this is going to run on Panda 2.
So if you pre-allocated them, you'll have the board go down and you'll have a stuck queue, and then you have to reallocate them. So
Yeah.
if an A9 job came in and you spread it out across Ursa 3 and my 686, my 886, and then Ursa 3 went down, then it could run on Ursa 2 or Ursa 1 or anywhere else.
Well, it's just a question of how do we reschedule. We should reschedule when a queue shows up or goes away, and we should reschedule when,
Why do we ever
I think-
reschedule?
well,
I think,
You
to be honest, I
only
think
have
you talk
one
about a
queue.
number of queues. You have one queue, exactly.
And then
And
you
then-
have one
okay.
device
Okay.
free, then you
But-
pick.
Then you make sure
Sorry, if you've got one queue per device.
No,
no, one queue
Just
and
got
the
one
whole
queue.
system. But users will want to know what's the plan. Like, we have so many devices, just tell me what the hell my job is and all of this stuff. And they want to see a queue with 1,000 items. They want to see the single device and they keep looking at it. And it's the third job in this, for this device.
For this device.
I can estimate when it's going to run. And this is something valuable.
You can't necessarily do that. Even
It can change, but they can
I
actually...
think that falls in the category of nice to have rather than something we need. Let's build something and then we can work on that. I think it's possible. It will be a bunch of work.
Although
but it'll be heuristic.
this is a much different way of thinking about it. So I mean, if we have a pool-based system, then we need to have some piece associated with each device that's always active. Whereas right now, the dispatcher is only active when there's work to be done on that board
Well, yeah,
for that job.
Well, no, not
So,
really.
well, you need something for the
Well-
device that's basically polling to see if there's new work to do all the time, right?
So
Well, in some sense, but it doesn't have to actually be a thing, right? I mean, you don't have to have a process running for each board. You have your scheduler, which just reacts to events.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Sigmund said, the event is job finishes, and then you look for job, and if there's not, then you say.
But you
the
look
next
for the
event.
job, you don't just take the top job off the
No,
queue,
Oh no, of course not.
because it might not be for that board.
Well, yeah, you have
Well,
to
no,
check.
you
have
But
to
that's
notify
not
the
very
scheduler.
much,
You
right?
notify the scheduler you finish.
Yeah.
Then you wait for an order from the scheduler. Run this job.
So,
Yeah.
Sigmund, regarding letting the user know how long until the job completes. I
Starts.
think, starts. Yeah, starts. I'd look at doing something like a retire rate, so you can easily build a list of all of the jobs in front of the user's job, and then divide that by the number of jobs
Yeah.
that are retiring across potential targets, and tell them, there's X jobs in the queue, and we seem to be retiring X jobs per hour.
Yeah.
And it's only ever going to be an estimate, because there may be one job in front of you. You may get, or
A
whatever. Yeah.
GCC job will go in, and that will take 24 hours to complete.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Although I was also, it's not like a problem with this design. I was just thinking about we should also be able to build a baseline for a job, for the class of device, because they're going to differ. So we don't have a retirement rate per job, because this would be quite meaningless. We have like very short jobs and could be having very long jobs. So,
But in
but
terms
it doesn't.
of the first past estimate, that's a fine way of doing it, and the system can learn how long the particular job takes, and it can turn it from a job retirement rate to a number of hours.
Mhm.
And job retirement rate also gets better once you scale, get more hardware, then you just get averages.
Okay. So yeah, so do we have a consensus that we just use one queue, and whenever there's an event that affects a job finish, job new, device new, stuff like that, we just decide what to do for
Well,
these events?
you have multiple queues. For a particular host, its job could come from many different queues. From my point of view, one could be its class, Cortex A9.
Right.
One could be its specific
Okay.
queue.
But I think the way I was expecting this to work was that you'd have one queue, and each entry in the queue would have various tags, and so basically what you do,
It's the same thing.
it's not conceptually very different.
To just offer a count or a point of support, that's exactly what Autotest does.
Sorry?
That's exactly what Autotest does for a scheduler.
Has
Right,
one
okay.
queue.
It's got one queue in this tag, and then when a device comes available, which ones can I run?
Yeah.
Right, and it's how Cyrus works, and it's how code imports works.
There's
Code imports is simple.
one important aspect. There's something in the document about being able to reinstantiate a job, or having a job history and doing something again. So when we have a job that says run on all Cortex A9s, then this job gets implicitly done on all of these. Like it's going to be multiplied.
Well, those would become, I think, separate submissions. wouldn't
Okay,
they?
it then becomes
Right,
separate
yeah.
submissions, we
So
don't
we
have
have
this
a
problem. I was
job
just
there.
going to say that if we actually have this kind of multiplying
Mhm.
aspect when we dispatch,
Right.
then we should have a link back to the template to be able to redo it.
I think the multiplication has to be before.
Right.
Or
sort of the layer.
Yeah.
Maybe it's part of the submission process, but if we have a database table called queue, if you do, you end up with multiple entries in the queue rather than having something clever.
The more typical case would probably be not all of a single type, but one of each type.
Right.
And that's pretty obvious. It's just a separate submission with type specified.
It
to each.
would be a little bit annoying on the user, but that's fine with me, and for the first version it's perfect, that you would have to know in advance what kind of stuff you have to put in those tags, I have these kinds of boards and so on. It'll be it mean that initially the user will have to look at a JSON file more than we probably wish them to, but that's okay.
It could be worse with the XML.
Does the scheduler have the capability, or is it even within scope, to handle tasks that run on a couple of hosts?
Not
Not right
initially.
now. We don't currently have anybody requesting that as something that's very high priority.
If
so.
somebody wants to play with that, there's a way of doing it.
Right.
So it doesn't take into account having good network that's not congested between these two, because that's, I imagine, the use case. But
Yeah,
you could
well, that
reserve
would be-
two devices, and once they're reserved, play with them. But we don't have
But it's not-
designing
it's
it
not-
so that they
okay.
can talk reliably is a different topic.
So
One thing is the user specify the device, or the test specify the device. The other thing is a test specify the capability. Say, I'm a multimedia test, a video test, or an audio test. I require audio capability.
Mm-hmm.
And then the board who said I provide the capability, then the scheduler will match them.
Yeah.
About tags.
Yes.
Tag, yeah.
Right.
That's, I think,
That
our
is
concept
very
of tags.
important scheduler scheme we need to apply on Lava. So when you make a JSON file, you do not necessarily specify the board type, but you specify
The tag.
the type.
Right.
The tag.
I think we could just generalize that we don't have board classes, we just have tags and we use them reliably.
Maybe.
Yeah.
That's a
The
detail.
board-
The thing is,
The board type is one kind.
Yeah, it's just a tag says board Beagle 1.
If you
There is, yeah, well, this gets into more detail then, but there are other things you need to know about board classes as well, than more than just the fact, like, for example, we started to move in this direction that we haven't really got anywhere yet, is the device type table could specify UBIT arguments, for example.
Isn't it true that...
So maybe from the user's point of view, when it comes to submitting the job, they don't see the difference, but there is actually a difference in... Because,
I know what you mean, I think...
But isn't it on dispatcher level instead?
well, it's something the dispatcher needs to know.
The dispatcher
But-
will always know what goings to talk to, so we can...
But do you want to edit the dispatcher's source code to when the UBIT arguments change?
I don't know how this works.
Shouldn't we have configuration files for devices as well on the dispatcher level?
Well, that's what we're talking about, is instead of having configuration files for this, having it stored in the database associated with the board type. And possibly even with a specific board. There may be something, if some particular board has some obscure piece of hardware connected to it and it needs slightly different arguments, then it could potentially have different things that need to happen.
But I mean, I agree, probably from the user's point of view,
But that's not something you would normally associate with
Yeah.
tags. It would be more specific to something else, like a board type. So, yeah, I agree.
For the sake of keeping our current architecture, I would just say that the dispatcher doesn't know anything, it just gets this knowledge from the scheduler, and the scheduler has a side table for every device we physically have, some magic for the dispatcher to be passed. So I like the dispatcher still being able to be a command line program that can run without having a database.
Itself talk to the database, probably.
Yeah.
Right.
So, sorry for jumping ahead a bit, but in the far future, what I'd like is a top-level job, which is build and test and benchmark GCC on 3 architectures. So you can think of that as eventually spanning out into a tree of tasks. Now, I've called them tasks there to not call them jobs, but they'll probably end up being spawned jobs based on events.
Isn't that...
So does that come out?
As in you finish a job and you spawn a bunch of other jobs.
Yeah, so the GCC build finishes soon spawn. Use this GCC to build eglibc as a test, to build Python as a test, to build X as a test, but not X, to build Y as a test. And then at the same time, actually, you spawn benchmark on this known configuration, benchmark on this, benchmark using X on this known configuration, Y, Z.
Michael, how you just describe a driver in next 12 months?
I think that kind of ends up being, that probably the way to build that is that's an extension to the, it's not an extension, it's a sort of something that talks to the scheduler rather than part of the scheduler, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there was
you just need
the
to
driver.
Right.
Your presentation sounded like that. The reason I ask is if I want to look at the original job and see how far it is along. So I need a way of tying these tasks, which are probably jobs, back to the parent. Back up the tree so I can have one page saying all of the individual tasks that are running and how far along they are, and whether or not they've passed or failed.
Is it useful to have something which you can say, wait until that task finishes and then quit, just a simple, so you've got like a wait until that finishes, something you can call a script?
It would be...
Okay,
It kind of sounds like make to me.
Yeah.
You just, make a fancy rule that touches files and, calls this scheduler thingy here, then it really is make to you. And you can have echoes to tell you where it is.
The tricky thing there is that, you build on one host, and then you've got 10 benchmarks to run, so you want to spawn those across all.
Yeah, let's make J. It's really make.
No, because
You've
you're
got
going to
to
be wanting,
distribute the process. You need a way of getting these other boards to run.
Yeah, but
and you don't want to lock up those boards while you're waiting for the GCC compile to finish.
What I'm saying is that as soon as this thing finishes, and just make command that called this dispatcher, that called the scheduler to run a job and schedule a job and wait for it to finish, you can continue with more things.
So how does this work for you right now? Are you building on a different machine and passing it off to another machine to do your testing and benchmarking, or are you doing this?
Everything's serialized on one machine.
On
so
one
the
machine.
The R machine that does the G6C build also does the test.
Okay.
And I've turned off benchmarks because it just
So,
takes too long.
I mean, if there's any way this whole process, I mean, this sounds like the whole thing is basically your test. The build, the benchmark, all of that, it's all happening on this one machine. I mean, if this is something that can be contained in an individual test case, I mean, for lack of a better term, it's something that would take a very long time to run, but that as a singular job could be dispatched to a machine.
See, this,
I think what he's saying is he would like to be able to
I
run
want to be able to
distribute.
spawn them so that I
Fast.
can do more tests.
So I think-
at a
Yeah.
reasonable time.
this is the use case that I'm in particular interested in because I want to build,
So, I mean,
build
so
a
can I
particular kernel.
offer you a
And-
hypothetical? Oh, sorry, no, finish.
It's just I do want to, there's several things that I want to build that will spawn off another engine with the simple case is a kernel and then run on very different hardware with all that kernel, but I don't want to lock up that hardware while I'm waiting for the kernel compile or the other bits and pieces that need to be built from other jobs.
You lock up as in I'm waiting for the kernel to build to finish.
Yeah, so the kernel build is one task.
Yeah, so
And
once
once
you
that kernel build is finished, if it's successful, then I'm going to schedule a bunch of tasks that test that kernel.
So,
And they're going to run on different
Yeah,
boards.
I
so
understand.
can I offer you a hypothetical tool we could supply that would allow you to build this yourself, which would be something like a command line tool that takes a JSON file, you run
Blocks.
lava submit
Yeah.
this JSON file, then it doesn't return, it sits there until the job is completed. When the job is completed, it prints on standard out some JSON describing what happened. So you could then write a tool that would take that argument, pass out, presumably check whether it was successful or not. If it was successful, then you could run it a bunch more times in parallel to do all the benchmarks.
So I could use something like a makefile
Yeah,
exactly.
It will be a make
to
really.
describe my tree, to do the parallelism, and then do a blocking call to some type of scheduler to distribute the jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, probably we should, in the long run, offer a service because you don't want to be running this job from New Zealand that's making network calls across the internet. Because then if your modem crashes overnight, it stops working. But that's a detail.
But the upside is that you can still type make J again tomorrow. Because let's make it touch files for you.
You use stamps and everything else, so if something fails, you're all good. The system that I have at the moment is designed to handle, to run as long as possible given failures in the other systems. So like the reporting, the schedule, whatever else, you can take things up and down and everything picks up easily transferring. But I'm likely to support everything on the network. So you mentioned a schedule and I need to shuffle these intermediates about. Everything's on my network so I can just see if it's mounted.
Right.
And there's no
Okay, yeah.
We will have something like
right.
that on the server side as well. So when you have a job that builds your GCC, you can store the artifacts in a place that will not go away. It will be it'll probably associated with either a group of people or just your user. And so when your next job comes along, you'll have access to those files. It'll be probably NFS mounted, but if we have network, but yeah, you will not have to copy them over again. That'll be insane.
Yeah. Well, what I have at the moment is that really the only thing that continues is the GCC build. So at the end of the GCC build job, it pushes the binary up to a local server, and then when like a benchmark tasks run, first thing it does is download that binary and put it in the path. And that's cheap enough, providing things a lot.
Yeah.
And it's reliable.
Should we continue?
Okay, can we continue? The next 3 user stories are pretty straightforward. As a user, I want to easily retrieve results for completed test jobs, and that is connected to launch control. Also, I would like to fetch previously executed test job from history and resubmit it. And I would like to be able to cancel test jobs that I submitted, so that they are not executed and no results are reported.
Cancel is pretty straightforward. It just needs a way to make sure that it can kill the dispatcher
Yes.
process associated with it.
Before it starts, just cancel it from the queue.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's easy.
You just need an
Canceling
identity.
from the queue is one thing. Canceling it while it's in progress just means it
Yeah.
has to kill the dispatcher.
Can you just kill the dispatcher and,
Right.
For the
recover later?
user,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
no difference.
Right.
So it would be nice, my true maxed out tree is probably days of computing time. It'd be nice if something more important was happening to be able to pause that. So if these chunks of the tree is run and these chunks are to do,
We talked about
here,
policy.
If you mean,
and let something more
Like
interesting
checkpointing,
happen.
basically.
if you mean preemption,
Checkpoint
I wouldn't do that.
No, not preemption. It's cooperative. So it could be that this is currently halfway through a 12-hour GCC build. You don't care. Once it's finished here, then it pauses there or something more interesting runs.
Well,
Yeah.
how would you envision this to work? So you store this somewhere else, then you can say, Lava, I'm free. You can wipe this board and give it to somebody else. Like you
No,
kind of like
So with the makefile example, we said for each leaf on the tree, it says do a block and call into Lava.
okay.
Into the scheduler. The scheduler could say you're not important anymore, so it blocks there,
yeah.
holding up the make job until more important things.
Yeah, but that's still a job granularity, so we don't need to break anything. We don't need to redesign anything. So it's this job, it's waiting in the queue, but once it's starting, it's going to really finish. We don't have to interrupt in the middle to do something different.
So certain tasks in the job have completed. I'm at a checkpoint where I check in to see what the next thing is and pause it there.
But it's not
Tasks
checking in with the scheduler to
job.
see what the next thing to do is. When the scheduler gives it its list of actions to do, it's giving it as one big chunk. And the dispatcher is driving it through that entire process.
But it sounds like you want to have several jobs
But
which
what
you
would
can
happen-
submit as a group, serialise these tasks where you can at any point.
At whatever point you interrupted that job, what would happen to it? I mean, are you saying that board goes back into the pool to do something else in the meantime, or?
So for example, if I was building GCC4
Right.
and I pause it at the test stage, I could be building GCC4, I could then have that board start running and build GCC5, and when that finishes, switch back to GCC4.
You're talking about reordering actions
Oh, I
midway
think-
through the test?
I think what Michael wants is to be able to have a job that is a logical job that has physical jobs, so to speak, that are, things that start, end, and the logical job is kind of still in progress, but nothing is really executing it, and then we can continue it in some way. I would just say that for now we don't do it, and we just, if you want to have this kind of granularity, you have to be a little bit more. You need to spend a little bit of time to write these jobs that they really depend on each other. Like we build GCC here, we store the artifacts, we test this build, we do things with it. You have multiple jobs, but the architecture will be the same. Like we can add new features as we have.
This
something
is
simple.
So let's move on. I'm not worried about
Okay.
this feature. I'm heading just to kill a job, which is
Taking-
our micro
right.
job.
But I think this use case is a higher level than the Lava.
Yeah.
It's a Lava
Probably
scheduler
so.
is a job for scheduler for Lava is one thing you run, you schedule and run finish.
Exactly.
But abroad that you can have a multiple job which you could synchronize or do what you want, but it will not belong to the Lava scheduler.
Yeah.
At this stage, I don't think it will.
Right, so we seem to have got to the cancellation use case.
Right, I was going to
skipping
say,
over a
I want
couple
to
of
go
others.
back
I have a couple of
actually
other
to
things
this
I'd like to
first
say, yeah.
As a Lava user, I want to easily retrieve results for a completed test job stored in launch
Yeah,
control.
we need some IDs
So-
on our side.
We've talked about this kind of before, but I don't think any real decisions were made. How do we get a link to the
Okay.
test results from the...
Right, because one way the sort of the way this works at the moment, yeah, exactly. Like there's a dispatcher step which is uploading results to launch control, but
Right.
we don't have the concept yet of any way for the dispatcher to tell the scheduler where
Right.
they ended up. Right?
There's no
There's
key
no-
or
there's-
anything that ties those two together.
I would say
Yeah.
that we don't need that. Just let's do it like that. The scheduler assigns a job ID that some kind of keep increasing,
if we can
and the
store
dispatcher will just give that to the launch control, and then we can tie
Then
them
the
together.
scheduler will know that.
Yeah, the
This
scheduler
job
can
will
ask
put
launch
this
control
up.
what is the result for this job,
Yeah,
and yeah, you go there, and they're all linked together.
Straightforward.
that's nice. Good, fine.
We have discussed that already.
Yeah. So essentially, will be an API to build a URL for this job and figure out what ended up in launch control.
So there's an agreement between
Yeah.
the scheduler and the dashboard for what the final URL will be. That's good.
Yep.
And what's the use case for fetching a previously executed test job and resubmitting for the new execution? Is that exactly the same test run again? Like, do you want, like a test specifies image, hardware pack, board class? Are we saying you just want to run exactly that test again, or you want to run the test again
Well,
with a new...
I think typically you probably want to run it again with a new image.
Right, in which case it's not
To
quite
me,
the same.
this feels like maybe it ties to the web interface, perhaps, that you have the ability to load.
Previous job, change one or two fields.
Change one or two things.
I only
yeah.
see one use case for this, exactly this use case scenario. So
guess-
something crashed, like the power went out, we had to kill it because something happened, and you want to do it again. You don't want to change anything. I don't think that's common, and you can probably implement it. You
Yeah.
can just resubmit it yourself, sorry.
Yeah, it doesn't seem very...
Doesn't need anything on the other side. We can have a history, maybe we have an API for fetching that history, it still doesn't, it's just
Yeah.
client-side problem.
We often have cases where there's something phantom going on, and you want to rerun exactly the same job, but resubmitting manually is fine.
Yeah.
But that's mostly for, when you say something phantom, it's because it could be something in the platform or something in the image that you're actually using to test. Because the toolchain is a case in which you're not really interested in testing the whole image. You're really interested in just testing the toolchain use case. So when it's
So
something
when I submitted GCC and built a test job, now and again there's something phantom that goes on in the environment. And you especially see this with parallel builds, where it doesn't make any sense. So the first thing is machine time is cheap, so resubmit the job to make sure you're not chasing the red herring. And also, find the cause of the phantom
Okay.
and eliminate it.
Okay, so maybe you're actually trying to reproduce a failure which you didn't expect.
Yeah.
So maybe you suspect that one
Right.
it's a dodgy panda board, so you resubmit and see if it gets a different one. And
Funny thing is that if the job describe a panda, not this panda, then
you
you
may get the same one again. Yeah.
Yeah, so I normally rerun the job on a different machine.
But it's an important thing. Like,
Yeah.
we should be able to tell the user once the job is starting to being dispatched, frankly. We should be able to tell where it's
Oh,
going
yeah,
to
yeah.
run. Exactly, not some random.
Will you support negative tenants, like you said, don't run it on, because I assume you're gonna support.
What? I'm not sure. I don't know.
Maybe.
You could probably construct a anti-tag and attach everything except the stuff you want to. So yeah,
Well, just like Jenkins has this whole label language, right? You can say x84 unless it's also
Jesus.
Pentium. I mean,
So your use case is for not running on a specific board?
Yeah, so you wanna say, you want a single option that this board might be bad, I wanna run it on any other board, or you might want to run a test except for specific, I wanna compile this on every board except running mine,
I think we can discuss
What-
exactly.
we-
matching.
no, we haven't. I think, but as we were said before, like the running on multiple boards is something that sort of you have to do. So if you want to say run on everything other than A9, then you'd be responsible for you at the moment to construct, say, run on A8, run on.
Well, but his point is that, let's say I have a test which uses neon, and you have a tag rep.
Oh.
You don't want to get the test dispatch to the Tegra because it doesn't have any on units.
Well, you could say not minus Tegra but plus neon, and that would kind of work. But the thing is, just realize that if you want to run on all the neons, how many do you submit? You know what I mean? Like, you can't do it through this plus neon tag. You have to know which kind of boards we have and submit one job for each one. Because otherwise you can
Right.
just end up with all the jobs on the same board, because that's the way we just schedule it. We don't do the server side understanding of what tags we need to. So it doesn't like, I feel like the concept of tags became meaningless.
But I mean, the other use case is the one where you've run a job on a Panda, you think it might be the board, that specific Panda board. I now want to run it on any other Panda except that one.
But yeah, okay. I'm saying that it's completely client-side stuff.
That's what I was going to say. This is so easy to do, just to look at a list of machines and say, you know,
So that one.
I don't want to pick that one. This one looks pretty free. Let's just do that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something that is easy for a person to do, but it's going to take a lot of effort to do here. It's going to be a kind of a corner case anyway, so I don't especially feel the need to spend a whole lot of time on that one.
Yeah.
Can you proceed? I would like to bundle the next two user stories, which is about reserving a board for a certain time.
We actually had
talked about
a
that
whole other blueprint on this, so
Yes.
we can remove that from this one.
Yeah. Okay.
That's something.
Okay,
That, yeah,
Email notification.
Yeah.
the log.
We have a problem.
right.
We don't know emails.
So we have notes from
But that's
another
it.
session on that one.
That was from that provide remote access session, right?
Right.
But this is also done via scheduler. You are reserving via scheduler.
In some cases, yes.
In some cases.
In some cases, we have boxes already deployed to the data center
Okay.
that can be reserved for use, or actually just accessed at any time by the people that have access to them.
Okay. So it's not handled by the
So
Lava.
those are similar to like quarter boxes.
Okay.
But in those cases, it's not handled by the scheduler, but in some cases we talked about, you may want to have something that where the scheduler deploys an image and then gives you access to the machine.
Okay.
So there's actually two different types of scenarios there. But yeah.
So which one should we support in this scheduler, Lava scheduler? Should we specify?
Obviously, the one that would go through Lava. The other one doesn't touch Lava at all.
Okay.
The other one is just machines in the data center.
No, there's
Right.
another system.
Okay.
So, moving on. The Lava admin want to be able to add new board and board description while we're using Django, so that's dead easy. Right?
Yeah. So that's so that's the same for the test suite description. And next is about tagging boards with different attributes, and that's actually something that might be applied for the board types. Tagging.
We talked about that earlier, and I think kind of decided that board types is something that you want to preserve outside the context of tagging. So,
Okay.
because there are special meanings to that you wouldn't normally apply to tags.
Okay.
So what is board type? Example.
Like a Panda, like an IMX 51, IMX 53.
Yeah.
I think that tags and boards are the same thing.
Is that thing?
I don't think
There's
so.
just some
Oh,
tiny
oh,
bit
the
of
board
logic that
tag.
looks up info based on the tag, which is the Panda tag.
You can have the same board.
But then you would have to
different-
search for that information for all tags, and what if there's conflicting information?
It's going to be in the dispatcher. Well, perhaps let's go through this example. Let's say we have a band board with this measurement things attached, and you
Okay.
perhaps need to set up something on the dispatcher level to be able to initiate that. I still think it's the responsibility of the dispatcher, giving all the tags, to know how to do it, and not some extra. Like, I don't see how board type is unique in this perspective.
So in this case, the way that I would see it working is you would first check to see if there's a specific setup, or like, let's just take the case of Ubuntu, right? So that was the case that was mentioned earlier. So there are commands you would pass to Ubuntu to boot this board. It would first check to see if there's one that's specifically for this board. And if there's not something special about this board, that it has its own, always use this for booting, then it would go to the board type. Otherwise, you would have to check for each individual tag and which tags take priority over others.
I think
I mean, in this
that-
case, it's obvious, you know, if
Yeah.
it's specified for this board, that's specific.
Mhm.
The next general use case the next general pattern would be for the board type.
Can we read
It's
that?
got to have one of those.
As soon as we need to add something new, we do have to have this little bit of code that decides how to interpret it as board type, this maybe this special tag. And what I'm saying is that perhaps we should take this out of the system and put it in
Why?
a script.
When it's easy, just have a board type.
But it's not generic. You need to hack it each time. You need
But
something different.
okay, so.
Well, I'm saying we should have a script that sits between the
Let me
dispatcher
approach
and
this slightly differently. Every board will have a board type. Not every board has additional tags.
still doesn't change the thing that every board could have a board type tag. And the script that sits between the dispatcher and the scheduler will be just able to figure out that I need to fetch the board type tag and this.
But what's the advantage to having that as a tag?
Because then this is a separate script that you have per board or per device, physical device, and then when they have a new device with some extra stuff attached, then you just edit this script and not redesign the tables to have a new bit that you need to look at, you know what I mean? Like, this type is not that specific,
I think
really.
this is the sort of thing which should be decided by whoever's implementing
Yeah,
it.
okay, let's
Yeah.
ignore that.
Yeah, this is too deep of an implementation detail. Let's continue.
Yes.
Especially
So
since we only have a few minutes left.
next user story is connected to Offspring. Running default test suites and jobs.
So this was in a blueprint we talked about yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the driver discussion.
So is this outside?
There's definitely scheduler work to be done there, and especially the scheduler itself. It wouldn't happen without that. But I think the specifics of it are discussed in this other blueprint. So
Yeah.
we don't need to rediscuss it here, I don't think.
Okay.
And then, yeah, usage reports for each board.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That would be pretty cool.
That'd be interesting.
Yes.
I don't think there's...
Since the information is already there, it's
Mhm.
just about arranging it.
presenting it well.
Yeah.
I don't know, is it worth talking about what specifically you'd want to test? Like you could say for each
I would think
tag or
things
device
like
time, what's the
how-
average wait time for devices tag for jobs tagged with power management or something like that? I mean,
Well, I'm thinking even more generic than that, such as how much of the time is this board in use? How much of the time is it sitting idle?
right.
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of things that will help us make decisions about where do we need new hardware.
All that's just reports and data view.
Right.
We have exactly everything needed to do that on launch control side with a data view and a report you can hack yourself. Because you'll have boards, we have association between the results coming from the scheduler
Right.
and not
You do
like,
need
it's
to
just-
know the exact
The launch
start
control-
time and end time.
The launch control won't have the submit time and start time, will it? Maybe it
No.
will, but in general it won't.
Okay.
I don't think so. So, but I mean,
Actually,
you can
it
do
may.
something similar, but on the scheduler side, because it has a view of when the job started and when it ended. And from that, you can derive how much time the board was in use and how much it was idle.
Yeah. Assuming that we
And I guess, there are scalability funds in this kind of job, but I don't think we're going to be talking about that much data, are we?
I don't think so.
We'll see. We'll worry
Assuming-
about that when we do.
assuming
if your
it's
job table is 20 million rows and we're trying to filter out the
Right.
numbers, then do calculations about
Well, I mean, if it does become a problem, it's something that you could aggregate periodically.
Yeah, there are other solutions that come to
Yes.
save with the scalability problem.
assuming it's still the same database, it's still just a report with us. You'll be able to, instead of querying against results, you'll be
Oh,
querying
sure.
against
Yeah,
history.
actually, yeah, if it's.
That's the
inside
upside of having this.
Yeah.
Okay. So are there any other use cases that people feel that we didn't capture here that are important to them?
Can schedule provide some evaluation time for every job, so user can know how long it may expect the job to finish.
We covered that.
Well, we talked about that, but we didn't write anything down about that.
Okay.
So,
What was that?
estimating job time, job start time, job completion time.
Oh.
So let's basically.
I think we can do that. I don't know if it will. It's just the UI that
Yeah.
we will build based on history and queue right now. I think we have all the bits of information necessary to compute that. We just don't know if we'll actually do
Right.
it.
With the board attributes idea we were talking about, would it theoretically be possible to submit a job which
We'll never complete.
will never complete because there's nothing
Yes.
to run it on?
Yes.
Yeah.
But you
Or
probably
reject
tell
that.
You can tell. You should be able to tell that as submit time, right?
Yeah.
So, and then you should provide. Yeah, we should.
Some kind of
But we have to
first
hide
level
Yeah, yeah,
verification
that's a good
that we have some board that meets these criteria.
The queue is so long that when I submit the board, I'm confident it will be a board by the time it gets to the end of the queue that fulfills these requirements. I don't think that's a valid use case.
Right. But Paul, we should still at least have a, completely primitive UI. We'll just allow people to look at the queue without logging in as admin.
Sure.
Just to be able to see, oh, this job is here. I need to
Yeah,
cancel it. It's
yeah,
pointless.
no.
Like,
So,
Right.
so what was that? That was saying, as a larger user, if I submit a job,
The combination of attributes for which there is no board.
Right.
It's
a
actually
combination
a
of-
dynamic problem,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
we didn't talk about, but we can.
hang on, what
Yeah,
what
but-
sense is it a dynamic problem?
We will end up like you have a panda board and you submit a job. It's in a queue. Then you grab the panda board and run
we can
away.
ignore
That's yeah. That should be rare enough that I don't think we have to worry about it too much.
I mean, you could say that whenever the set of
You-
board,
you could say whenever
then
the
you can
scheduler
run through this queue,
iterates through
Yeah,
that
you
list
just
flag
and checks
things that will
things,
know and
Cancel
verify
jobs or yeah.
and not to be satisfied.
So that is another use case for
Yeah.
cancelling the old job.
Yeah, so jobs get cancelled when there is no longer a possibility of actually dispatching them.
For a certain time.
Oh yeah,
One day or
makes
2 days
sense.
old.
Yeah.
Now there was something I was behind here. What was the other thing? We say something else like was
Remote the job, we have
when a board is removed.
No, after some time, after there's no way of running a job for like a day, we just cancel it because we don't expect the board to come back. Like you had to span the board, you disconnected it, you don't want it to disappear just because you disconnected it. for a
Sorry.
second, right?
The other thing we said was, as a Lardo user, I want to be able to see the queue.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes.
But surely if the board disappears and goes to the end of the queue, it can't exit. You have the facility to resubmit a job that I submitted before anyway. So we can read things from multiple angles in a way
Yeah.
which is perhaps really not complicated.
But I just wanted to avoid a situation when something happens for a brief moment and it cancels all the jobs because then the clock went down and suddenly you had no boards, so jobs all the history went away. It's still there, but it's a pain to recreate.
When your one board of a particular type gets rebooted, half of the queue vanishes.
Yeah, but our system will be very responsive though. Okay. Paul, are we going to decide which of the user stories will be actually implemented? Because we've got a really good understanding what
We need to hash through
should
these
happen.
notes later.
Just should prioritize and rearrange.
Yep.
So we know what we're going to do, so we should figure out which work items we're going to do. Right? So,
Well,
that's not quite how we spin it.
What we should do, we should just explicitly say what we're going to do because Do you want to do this at later on, like a blueprint? Figure out
who is the drafter for this spec? Is it?
That's myself. Should be me. Yeah.
Are you the